Ronald Acuna Jr. is out, and I'm concerned.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Baseball Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Baseball Party, your home for the best Atlanta Braves baseball talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste, and joining me today are Grant McAuley and Jarvis Davis. From brakes to exhaust kits and beyond, eBay Motors has over 122 million parts to keep your ride or die alive. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. And, of course, the Atlanta Baseball Party is brought to you by and is on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So as Grant has coined it, Maximum Fried was on one Tuesday in the Atlanta Braves 2-0 win over the Washington Nationals. We'll talk about that. Max and Marcell, coming in hot and going deep. We'll also talk about a legendary Brave that gets legendary status again in Cooperstown. But first, let's download about the Braves bouncing back from a smackdown to hand the Nats a shutout, and also some unfortunate news that we have to react to yet again. You know, Grant, it's kind of like that sound. For us, it's the best of times and the worst of times, meaning we saw some hints of Ronald Acuna Jr. returning to NL MVP form. So I call that the best of times when you see him hit a 3-run home run and you're like, ooh, if he starts to turn the corner, so come the Braves turning the corner as well, only to find out that Ronald Acuna Jr. is done for the season. A major blow this past weekend with that torn ACL in his left knee. So to you, what does that mean for his future with the Braves?
It doesn't change much in that regard as far as what's going on in the immediate future. He had 5 years left on his deal coming into this year. That's not going to get crumpled up and thrown away. I mean, I think as much as anything, talking to Brian Snitker and talking to Ronald's teammates a couple of days ago, everyone feels terrible for Ronald because they know what he's been through before. Obviously, they know how much he loves playing baseball. And obviously, we've all seen how good he is at the latter. So it's unfortunate to see him have to go through this again. I mean, I don't have any doubt that he's capable of coming back and being an impact player again. I don't think anybody does. But I mean, Ozzy Albies said, you know, I'm broken for my friend. It's just, you read it. I mean, Ozzy's been through these kind of injuries before that have kept him off the field for long periods of time, not the ACL. And it seems like a very cruel twist to have somebody go through the same injury on the other knee just a couple of 3 years after having already gone through that. And of course, for Ronald, it takes him away from the game that he loves. And people can say whatever they want about the way that he plays, how loud it is, how flashy it is, all of those things. I think it's great personally, but you know, you cannot question how much this guy wants to be on a baseball field. That's why he plays when he goes home to Venezuela. He shows up at spring training ready to, you know, drop tanks and steal bases and do all the things that you expect him to do. So it doesn't change a lot about the, you know, the long-term future, I don't feel like, for Acuna, but it is a setback. You hope a temporary setback for him, even though the temporary in this case means the rest of 2024 and is probably going to lead on into 2025.
Yeah, and Jarvis, it made me think about, you know, those injuries that for a fan base just really takes you down. And I thought about Mike Trout and also not just the fan base, but those great players who keep hitting the heights of greatness, but they'll have a setback. And it's a tough go for a guy, like you said, Grant, that loves baseball the way we see and know that Ronald Acuna Jr. does. And I think Jarvis as well, just a tough setback for the Braves. But that said, what does this mean for him and his future with the Braves?
I'm concerned about his mental psyche. I don't think it has anything to do, like Grant mentioned, like he got 5 years left on this deal, like you said. And then also I don't think Alex Anthopoulos is thinking like, all right, now let me see if I can get some trade value and trade this dude up out of here. That's not happening. So, but for me, I'm concerned about the mental makeup, right? Because when you think about going through injuries and, you know, I've tore some ligaments in my knee when I was in college. And the worst part for me was not being around my teammates, right? Because I was going through rehab, not being at practice, like you miss all the little fun moments and everything like that. It's just, that's the part that really sucks. Now, granted, you would love to be out there producing and doing your thing, but that camaraderie is the thing that that really, really kind of eats at you when you're sitting there trying to, get back on the field or whatever. So and especially with how Alex Anthopoulos puts such a big emphasis on the locker room and that camaraderie, and Chris Sale has talked about that, and how it's like, yeah, these dudes, are genuine. They have fun, and I love to be a part of this type of thing. But when veterans like that come in the locker room and immediately have that type of reaction to it, that lets you know how important it is, and that it's no different when Ronald Acuna is not there. So for him not to be there, I'm truly concerned about his mental. I know physically he can do it and come back and be, not is seen at least on the same level as a type of player that he was, but it's just going through that process again,
Yeah.
and especially when you win a World Series when he was out, I know that eats at him. And then, given how the Braves are, yeah, they're struggling right now, but they still have the pieces to get it done. And if they were to figure out a way to get it done again without him, it's just I know that would just eat at him mentally.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the mental part of that, because Tyler Matzik has been very open and honest about the challenges that you face mentally with the ups and downs of injuries, the ins and outs of injuries, and not knowing, it does start to play with your mind, because you're thinking to yourself, okay, when do I get back? How do I get back? Michael Soroka, we saw all that he had to go through. So yeah, there is that mental piece of it indeed. And of course, we'll definitely be rooting for Ronald Acuna Jr. to get back and get back better, if at all possible. But, Grant, it also makes you think about the practicality of it. We saw it last night with Michael Harris II going at the top of the batting order. And what top of the order or order overall do you see in the absence of Acuna that maybe gives the Braves that best chance to, one, fill that leadoff gap, and then really kind of jumpstart their offense, because it's still not quite where we're expecting it or have expected it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's nowhere close to what we expected it to be, even if the repeat performance of a year ago was just a pie in the sky. I mean, you're not going to have a history-making offense every single season, but can you have a very good one, a great one of the best in baseball? Yes, they have the pieces to still do that. I want to get into that because I do think there are going to be more moving parts, but I did want to throw in one final little note on Ronald and how much he loves baseball. I mean, at the start of the year, I mean, way back in late spring training or early in the season, when he wrote that Players Tribune article, he talked about in great detail how depressing it was to have to sit outside of what the Braves were accomplishing in that season. And yes, he's happy for his teammates, but if you don't think that lit the fire of wanting to be part of that himself, then you don't know Ronald Acuna Jr. And if you haven't read that article, I would tell anybody, go find that. Just search for Ronald Acuna Jr. Players Tribune and read that. Now, and I'm putting all that to the side because the Braves do, as I've talked about a lot this week, have to start adjusting to life without Ronald Acuna Jr. here in 2024. I think we could see a number of different guys at the top of the order, including Michael Harris, Ozzy Albies. I wouldn't rule out seeing a guy like Jared Kelenic up there as well if he gets hot, because I think that this puts Brian Snitker in a place where at some point you're kind of riding the hot hand a little bit more than you would if you had a fixture at leadoff, a fixture at 2, and a fixture at 3 and 4 and so forth. You know where I'm going with this. Now you've already seen Marcell Ozuna move up in the order, and rightfully so. He didn't need to bat 5th as well as he was hitting. You wanted him up there as many times as you could get him to drive in runs. But I think Harris is built to lead off. I think he could lead off for any of the other 29 clubs, and they'd be happy to have him do that or hit towards the top of the order. Austin Riley at 2 is really interesting to me. Maybe that'll get him kickstarted, hitting in front of Marcell. And Matt Olson, I think, is starting to show some signs of being the cleanup man that the Braves expected. From 5 on, getting Sean Murphy back helps, and some of the other pieces we've seen be a little bit mix and match. But it's going to look a little bit different. And the Braves, who had been so consistent with how that lineup looked, at least through the first 5 or 6 spots, are going to start making some changes. But again, getting Murphy back, having Riley walk back in, unfortunately on the same day that Ronald was put on the injured list, that at least can be somewhat of a boost for a club that, as Sean Murphy said, is going to have to figure out a way to combine for an extra Ronald, because there's just no replacing that guy. There's not a prospect you can call up. There are very few, if any, trades that would even be plausible on planet Earth to get a player like Ronald. It's just that difficult to adjust to life without one of the best players in baseball.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to ask you guys before we wrap up, Jarvis, I want to hear your thoughts as well. But Grant, as a baseball aficionado, I just had to ask this question of you, because I thought it was very interesting and exciting times as well to find out what Major League Baseball decided to do as far as honoring those members of the Negro League. So Josh Gibson on Tuesday became Major League Baseball's career leader with a 372 batting average, surpassing Ty Cobb's 367, when Negro League records for more than 2,300 players were incorporated after a 3-year research project. So MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred said, quote, "This initiative is focused on ensuring that future generations of fans have access to the stats and milestones of all those who made the Negro Leagues possible. Their accomplishments on the field will be a gateway to broader learning about this triumph in American history and the path that led to Jackie Robinson's 1947 Dodger debut." So what do you think about Major League Baseball's decision to incorporate this extended part of its history into the record books?
Long overdue. And I know this has been a process that's been going on for a while. And I had an episode of my show last year where I talked about when this had really come to the forefront, that they were making significant headway, and Baseball Reference started to port over and update the career stats for players like Jackie Robinson, Satchel Paige, all of those guys that played significantly in the Negro Leagues and also went on to play significantly in the major leagues. And we can put all the, I guess, conversation aside of why there had to be 2 professional leagues. I think that's one of the great injustices of all of it, because we'll never know from purely a sporting perspective how great all of these players could have been competing against one another. So it goes beyond just Major League Baseball and the Negro Leagues. And it speaks to, I think, the overall legacy of professional baseball and all of the great players who have put on a uniform and gone out on that field. So I'm very excited about that. I know Ted Williams devoted a lot of his Hall of Fame speech to, trying to raise awareness for how great some of these players were and how they were not getting their just due. But, that's the great what if of it all. Unfortunately, we'll never know. But there's no question about the talent. And I don't think there should be any question about the accomplishments either. And I'm excited to see what all of this does, statistically speaking, but more so beyond that, because this is so far beyond the numbers, what it does for the overall legacy of the game of baseball, which, the Major League Baseball side of things, the Hall of Fame side of things, everybody should be looking to find ways to incorporate all of the stories that make this game so great. I think this is a huge step in the right direction, and I'm really excited to see how all of this is implemented and what it ultimately does in helping us paint a more correct picture of what the history of baseball truly is.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely just amazing, because I think back to when you were talking, I was thinking back to when I did a book report on Satchel Paige. I was just like, man, why this man didn't get into the major leagues till he was 42 years old and still was being productive too, right? And striking folks out and doing. It's just amazing to me, like the history of the Negro Leagues. It's like, and I just found out maybe probably a couple of years ago that my wife's great grandfather, he played in the Negro Leagues as well, because I went down to we visited her uncle. And we were down in Huntsville, Alabama, and he kind of like, I got the little man room and everything, and there was this book that was turned to a specific page. I was like, what's going on here? So, when I went back up, I started reading through it, and I was looking like, oh, you got the same last name as y'all. Sir, what is going on here? He's like, yeah, but Dad played, da-da-da. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. So, I think he played for the Atlanta Black Crackers too, if I remember correctly. So, yeah. It was, that was a thing that I got into, so well, because I'm Atlanta out there, that's represent that. So for somebody that could be in the family that played in the league, and then to be able to be introduced to it at such a young age and find out what was going on in those leagues, for the Major League Baseball to do something like this, it makes it right. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just that's pretty much, it's probably as simple I can put it. It makes it right. So, yeah, I think, this is something that is good, and I love the fact that Major League Baseball is doing this.
Much respect to the majors for doing the right thing in this case. And like you said, extending back to the legacy of baseball to move the sports forward. When we come back, we'll talk about Max and Marcell coming in hot and going deep. This episode of the Atlanta Baseball Party is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. It's all the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. And we know that with this Atlanta Braves team, you got to see the passion each day in and out with each and every member of this team who want to win it all. For Ronald Acuna Jr., they have the drive for it, and we just need to have the patience for that. Just like finding that right piece for your car. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So Jarvis, the Braves got their 9th shutout of the season Tuesday against the Washington Nationals, which is tops in the majors for shutouts. But like we talked about in the earlier segment, they're still concerned because they only scored 2 runs, one of which was off a sac fly from Jared Kelenic. We were talking about him earlier and what his ability might be in the lineup. But you got to be a little bit concerned because I'm not sure this is really the style of play that we want to get used to.
To be honest with you, no, we don't want to. But hey, we talked about practicality, right? In reality, we got to live in it. We got to live in reality. This is what it is. And I'm okay with it as long as they're getting wins, right? As long as they continue to stack up those wins. And, I think they're like 5.5 games or behind the Phillies right now in the NL East. So, as long as they're staying on pace with it, I'm totally fine with it, until they get this thing figured out at the plate. So, and, obviously we talked about the loss of nephew being out, Ronald Acuna Jr. For those who haven't been listening or paying attention to any of our podcasts, when I talk about this man, I call him nephew. That's what it is. But this is the thing that I'm okay with them having a new identity because they are adjusting. This is going to take some time to try to figure this thing out. We talked about how, I don't know who's necessarily going to be the permanent guy in the leadoff spot. We talked about Michael Harris. I feel like he's the good fit. I feel like he can grow into that, not necessarily to replace a nephew, but be a guy that you can count on to be able to get on base, steal some bases, make it a little bit easier for guys to drive him in. So, you saw he took a couple walks last night in the past few games. He's showing that patience at the plate, and I think that's definitely a good thing. So for me, I think overall, this is not how we expected it, but this is exactly what we need to get used to.
Yeah, and I think I heard something that I thought was an interesting comment, of course, with Michael Harris the second in the leadoff position. And you do have, to your point, with 5.5 games is like nothing to wipe away in the majors, right? So when you think about the fact that we're also still in May and we have several weeks, actually a couple of months almost before we get to the trade deadline in August, I think that ultimately speaking, you have the time to be able to experiment just a little bit, right? With that, tinker with the lineup until you get it to where you want it to be. And this is kind of that opportunity of a tinkering period, especially with the Michael Harris II. He is obviously probably the one that makes for the right choice in that leadoff spot, but you never know. And you kind of got to see where everyone else falls. Matt Olson, with him coming around, you want to leave him where he is. You move Marcell Ozuna up, so on and so forth. So it may be a minute before you can get back into scoring 6, 7, 8 runs a game, and that being the norm rather than the exception. But ultimately speaking, like you said, Jarvis, last we checked, 1-0 is a win, 2-0 is a win, 2-1 is a win, et cetera, et cetera. So at this point, it's really just about stringing wins together to allow Alex Anthopoulos, or not stringing them together, to allow Alex Anthopoulos to see whether or not this is going to be good enough because your pitching staff has been so solid for the most part, or whether you really need to be out there thinking about more than just getting yourself another arm in the absence of obviously a Spencer Strider and some of what we're seeing out of Charlie Morton, these last couple starts. But it really will allow him to know if he needs to focus more on expanding the pitching rotation to get himself that solid fit starter for once and for all, or if he needs to be concerned about getting another arm. As far as that.
But I know you mentioned the guys, Charlie Morton, how he's definitely had his struggle. I think, he gave up 8 runs last time we saw him and against the Nationals, and he hasn't done that in quite some times, and given his age and everything like that, I get the concern. But when you look at the guys who've been performing, like you talk about that big 3 in the playoffs, right? You talking about Sale, Max Fried, and Ronaldo Lopez. Like, they have been lights out. You talking about complete games. Max went eight games on Tuesday. So I mean, eight games, eight innings, eight innings on Tuesday. You know, those are some of the things that you look at that rotation. You say to yourself, like, okay, they got a strong 3 right now. So, and I think that, you know, I know we're gonna talk about it a little bit. Spencer Schwellenbach. I hope I got that right. You know, coming into the fold here pretty soon. You have to kind of look at it and say, okay, you got your top 3 guys, as long as they continue to do what they're doing. And, you know, if you got need some young guys, then make sure those guys get that rest and sprinkled in from time to time to be that 6th starter or a swap out on that 5th starter in the rotation. Those are some of the things that, you know, you're just going to have to do. And I feel like maybe you look at a corner outfielder, but I think that this pitching rotation, as far as that on the top end of it, I feel like they're good to go. Those guys have been a joy to watch so far this season.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasant surprise. And thinking about that pleasant surprise, it's like you said, you know, if you watch the Atlanta parties, all the sports parties that we have, then you would know that on Tuesdays, we have coined it the Marcell Williams moment. We cannot go a show without talking about Marcell Williams. So Jarvis, I would like to introduce to you the Max and Marcell moment, because Max Fried is absolutely doing some scary good things on the mound, and Marcell Ozuna is absolutely doing some scary good things at the plate. And I think, to your point, when you get that out of Max Fried, showing you each and every time he gets up to start, that it's not just about, hey, I'm going to get us through this. I'm just going to get us through 4 or 5 or 6 innings, which in Major League Baseball, that's kind of what we've become accustomed to. He's really operating at such a high level, and we got to give him so much credit, because it didn't start off that way. You know, Grant sent out a tweet earlier today, quote, Max Fried had an 18 ERA, 10 earned runs in just 5 innings after his first 2 starts of the year. And then he went on to say he's allowed 12 earned runs total in his past 9 starts combined, turning in a 1.75 ERA over that stretch. And of course, as you mentioned, 8 scoreless on Tuesday, dropping that ERA further down to 2.97 across 66 innings. And not just 8 innings with no earned runs, but just 7 hits, and you don't get anywhere with those. And he getting himself out of jams once again is also a critical thing that we saw in Tuesday's start. Tuesday's outing also had 6 strikeouts and just 1 walk. And you think about that, this was a pitcher's duel through 6 innings with Jake Irwin. You wouldn't know it with how the final result, although it was just a 2-0 game. But man, oh man, did Max Fried do his thing once again.
Yeah, this is like what we're used to, right? You know, in these last few starts, he had the shaky first couple of starts against, and I think it was a little bit overblown, right? Because it was against the Philadelphia Phillies, which is it's understandable. You know, right? Like, all right, come on now. But you know, he's just been lights out, as you talked about, you know, as of late, and that's one of the things that you look at. And you know, it's one of the reasons why, you know, their first 3 starters are as good as any in baseball. They have a 3.49 ERA, which ranks 3rd behind the Phillies and the Cubs, right? So when you think about that, like, they are doing some numbers, and I think that's okay to say that this is their identity for now, right? You know, you hope that they don't have to, like I said, they don't have to be like last year, you know, but can we get close to it? You know, if we start match that up with this start at top of the rotation right now, you're talking about a dangerous team, and the Phillies better watch out. You know, if that happens. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I really appreciate what Max Fried has been doing, especially in the contract year and the uncertainty as to whether or not he's gonna have a Braves uniform on next year. Like, man, keep contract Max. That's what I call him. Keep on doing your thing.
Yeah, and you know, since we're always talking about nicknames, that we'll just say Jarvis coins. I can't even say the baseball party or the party's coin. Jarvis coins these nicknames like Ozone. But I mean, literally, he's in, and no pun intended to be corny, but he's in a zone unto himself. Right. He absolutely, like I said, a pitcher's duel back and forth between Fried and Irwin until the 7th inning, where Ozuna breaks a scoreless tie. And it's come to that, where you literally, when Marcell Ozuna goes to the plate, 16 home runs now this season, right back at the top of the conversation for leading the National League in home runs, you think to yourself, he's the guy that can get it done. And that's the confidence that really, if you think about it, you've had for Marcell Ozuna this last year and a half as being that guy who in clutch situations or in situations where no one else is producing for the Braves, he can get it done.
Think about what you just said. No one else is producing. They got no runs on the board. And then next thing you know, we're getting used to Marcell Ozuna coming through for everybody. What? that is right. That is so crazy for me to sit here and say something like that, and hear you say it, right? And for us to be in a space where watching this team and knowing the guys that we expected to come from, like we saw last year, now granted, Marcell Ozuna had an excellent year last year, but when you talk about the reigning NL MVP and Ronald Acuna Jr., and then Matt Olson, hitting 50+ home runs last year, those are some of the things that you like, wow, this is crazy. Like, we could count on these guys for the next how many years, but
right.
That's not necessarily the case, but to sit here and watch Marcell Ozuna and do what he's been doing throughout this year, and also on Tuesday, that's some of the stuff that like you just can't put a value on that, and for him to come through consistently in those spots, it's just a joy to watch.
Especially because if not for what Marcell Ozuna has been able to do to give the pitching rotation something to work with, we may not be having this kind of conversation about the Braves, considering all the injuries at this point. How we look at Memorial Day as that mile marker, we're still having a conversation about them being in the World Series postseason division title discussion. When we come back, we'll talk about a legendary Brave getting legendary status again in Cooperstown coming up in the stretch. This episode of our Atlanta Baseball Party is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. So you look at the fact that last night, the Minnesota Timberwolves were actually absolutely able to somehow stave off elimination and live another day in the Western Conference Finals against the Dallas Mavs. But the Mavericks still have a minus 600 chance to move on to the NBA Finals, of course, to do something that has been done 154 times, because no team has ever come back in NBA history to go up 3-0, I guess you would see, and be down 3-0 in the case of the Minnesota Timberwolves, which is why they have a plus 450 chance when it comes to moving on to the NBA Finals. Now, flipping it over to the NHL side, and you look at the Stanley Cup Final, Dallas Stars plus 155 to get there, Florida Panthers plus 230, New York Rangers plus 370, and the Edmonton Oilers plus 500. If you want to get in on the action, you got to go to FanDuel.com. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So we saw a tweet on X that said Spencer Schwellenbach will join the Braves in Atlanta. He's scheduled to start on today, which will mark his MLB debut, the All-American at Nebraska in 2021, Big Ten Player of the Year. That credit goes to Bally Sports Atlanta for sharing that information. But it was interesting because it's like, okay, you never quite know where the Braves are going to go in the experiment known as the fifth spot in the rotation. But here we are with bringing him up. And the question becomes, here we have another pitching prospect. Do you think that there's an opportunity, a possibility for the Braves to strike, no pun intended, for them to strike gold again with Schwellenbach joining the starting lineup?
Yeah, sure. I've always trusted the Braves when it comes to pitching, right? Do I need to name them? Maddox, Glavine, Smokes, not necessarily that all those guys came up through the ranks, but when you think about the evaluation of those guys, and Spencer Strider, his rise to the major leagues, and we saw how he came up. He was initially going to be come in as a closer, and Schwellenbach essentially was a position player and a closer, as well. So he got a 98 mile per hour fastball. So kind of similar, very similar to Spencer Strider. That's why I was like, oh, okay, Spencer is back. Not that one, the other guy. He's coming. He's coming with the fastball, and he's a guy that has some high A experience. Not that many starts, above high A, but when Alex Anthopoulos has a hunch, I'm going to tend to trust him, T, because this is something that's very interesting because he was scheduled to, be in Gwinnett,
Yeah.
and pitch down there. But when you think about, but you look at the story and you start thinking about, all of the interesting things that were going on. Like he had gone to a wedding, for his brother's wedding in Missouri.
Yeah.
Then he was on his way to Gwinnett, and then his wife was driving back to Mississippi to Gwinnett, and on the way to Gwinnett, he called her and say, "Hey, babe, change of plans. We're going to the show instead of Gwinnett. So
Yeah.
go ahead and make that a 2-hour drive. The hour drive. Excuse me. Sometimes it can be 2 hours. Depending on what time of day it is, down to Atlanta. So we can go ahead and be here for that. So yeah, it's always cool to see these call up stories, and Schwellenbach is no different. But yeah, I think this could potentially be another one of those, additions that, hey, he can be a guy that can be part of that fifth man rotation, and sometimes be a sixth guy. So you can get the top of the rotation, because we talked about how that's solidified. Now it's time to see what young guys they can bring into the fold. Especially when you got like a guy like AJ Smith-Shawver, who
Yeah.
just recently went on to the injured list.
That's the biggest piece, because we've looked at a couple of different people. We've looked at Bryce Elder, and we know that he definitely showed big signs at the beginning of last season. Looked at Darius Vines, AJ Smith-Shawver, which was looking like maybe the most viable this season until he went down. And of course, we'll come back from the IL hopefully and be just fine. But yeah, we just got confirmation as well from the Braves that yes, they did indeed bring him up to the major league roster and option Jimmy Herget to AAA Gwinnett following last night's game. So we know indeed that that's who's going to get the start for tonight. To end on a positive note, another great thing happened for Atlanta in the historical perspective of baseball overall as well. But hey, Atlanta will take credit for it. Hank Aaron, who of course 50 years ago changed America when he blasted his record-setting 715th career home run and passed Babe Ruth on the sports all-time list, has done it again in big fashion. A statue of Aaron is now in Cooperstown paying tribute to his legacy. On May 23rd, which was after our show last week, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum debuted the statue, ensuring that his lifetime heroics on and off the field would be celebrated for all time. So just had to give our guy, the legend, Hank Aaron, all of the flowers for once again, and also give Major League Baseball the flowers for honoring him in that way.
Yeah, no doubt. To see Billy Aaron up there, Miss Billy Aaron, sorry, I'm trying to be disrespectful. Miss Billy Aaron up there talking about Hank and what he, meeting him, and how she was just so thankful to meet a guy like that, and to be able to go on that walk with him. That's just a beautiful story. Just to see that type of stuff, kind of get me in my emotes. You know what I'm saying? A little bit. Like, man, so cool. To be able to have a partner just to go with you. Walk with you, through all of the stuff that he went through, right?
Yes.
And to be able to see and live to see the acknowledgement, just throughout the process. Yeah, that is, I can imagine what she was going through up there talking, for him to be, put in like history, right? Like that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I thought the same when we were talking earlier about the major's decision on bringing in the Negro League Baseball stats, and my mind went to Rachel Robinson and the fact that she was able to see her husband get that acknowledgement once again as well. Thanks for stopping by the Atlanta Baseball Party, your home for the best Atlanta Braves talk. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you on the Atlanta Sports Party tomorrow.